Hi, welcome to another edition of Smoke Signals channel. My name is Ethan Morris. Here again to do another video. I'm going to do another ranking video for you tonight. Coming to you from the western region of North Carolina, here high up in the mountains. It's a cold and partly cloudy kind of winter day here on this January day. And this is usually the most brutal weather we get is this time of year between now and February, end of February. But we'll make it through with lots of music and hopefully be doing a good many of these videos for you when we're cooped up in the house like this. So today I thought what I would do is talk about my top 25 favorite hard rock and proto-metal bands. And most of these, when I was originally going to do this, I was just going to focus on the 70s because that was a huge decade for hard rock, proto-metal, sort of the beginnings of heavy metal, but before it was true metal and before people even called it that. There were all these bands that were doing really heavy music and no one quite knew what to call them. In hindsight, historians like myself like to refer to them as hard rock, proto-metal, and you're going to see that in this. These are 25 of my favorite bands of that genre. Some of these are from the 80s also. I've got some 80s and even some 90s in here. And some of these bands are going to venture over into the prog realm. Some of them are going to be more blues rock. Some of them are going to be more leaning towards metal, but not quite metal. So you're going to see a wide range of stuff here. There is even a couple of bands that might be considered glam rock as well. So we'll go ahead and get into it. And these are not necessarily in any particular order, but I did save the last 10 are definitely my favorites. And I've picked a couple of props, at least one prop for each band, and possibly my favorite album from each band. So let's go ahead and get started. Down at the bottom is a band, and again, this is not necessarily in any particular order. These are very interchangeable. There's some days when I listen to some of these bands a lot more than the others at different times, right? It just moods change, tastes change. But first band, number 25, is Free. And this is their album, Fire and Water. A classic album, of course, because it featured the hit All Right Now. It's also got some great tracks on. The title track is awesome. Remember is a great song. Mr. Big, probably my favorite song by these guys. Of course, Paul Rodgers, who would later be the lead singer for the mega successful Bad Company, and then later on Queen in the last couple of years. But it also featured the amazing guitar player Paul Kossoff, who unfortunately left us in 1976 of a drug overdose. And he's one of those amazing musicians that you wonder what he would have done had he lived. So a good starting point for this band, Free, is check out this album, Fire and Water, and also their performance at the Isle of Wight Festival, 1970. These guys were about 18, 19 years old when they played that festival. So coming in next is a band that might be a little bit controversial, might be a little contrarian. They're thought of typically as a punk band or the kind of proto-punk, along with the MC5 and Love and Velvet Underground. These guys are considered like the founders of the foundation of punk. And the band is Iggy and the Stooges right here. So I've got their first album. Let's see. Got like their second album, Funhouse. Third album, Raw Power, classic album cover there, produced by David Bowie. And then we've got some collections, Open Up and Bleed, and collections you see there. That's actually a really good one. Year of the Iguana's got some stuff that would have been on their fourth album that was never released. But Iggy and the Stooges, and this is by far my favorite album here, Funhouse. One of the best albums of all time, rock albums. This is really heavy, and that's the thing. And that's why I included it in this list. First album, produced by John Cale of Velvet Underground. I really just think that it's important that people realize how heavy these guys actually were. It was beyond punk. It wasn't quite metal, but it was getting there. And so hard rock would even be an understatement. I mean, I think this is some of the heaviest music that was released in that golden era of like 69, 70, 71. This album right here, 1970. It's a must-have for any serious rock music fan, and should be in anyone's collection, even if you're not into the kind of the later punk stuff. Stooges, man, it holds up. I've been listening to these guys since I was a kid and teenager, and then I'm still listening to them. Let's see. Okay, so I guess my 23rd choice is Budgie, Welch Trio. You see the band right there. These guys often got compared to Rush, partly because of Burke Shelley's vocals, really high pitched, and he kind of looked like Geddy Lee in the early days. We unfortunately lost Burke this past a year ago in the last year in 2022. But this is their self-titled album from 1971, which features it even says it here on the cover, Crash Course and Brain Surgery, which of course was covered by Metallica in 1986 in their Garage Days Revisited EP. Budgie's just really good. It's that classic trio, bass, guitar, drums. Very heavy stuff for the time, bordering on metal. I think this is one of those bands that you kind of scratch your head and wonder why they didn't make it, and why they weren't bigger than they were. And I think that one of the reasons is the songs were a little strange. Burke's vocals were a little strange. He kind of had this early Geddy Lee thing, but without the range. He seemed to struggle a little bit in some of the higher ranges. And then the song titles like Crash Course and Brain Surgery, Guts, New Disintegrating Parachute Woman. I mean, I think that this just they were a little too strange even for the kind of experimentation that was going on in hard rock, early hard rock and metal. But I love those guys a lot. Their album Squawk also is a great one. Okay, so I guess number 22 would be these guys right here, Montrose. I talked about them I believe on my last video about debut albums, top 20 debut albums. Of course, the mighty Sammy Hagar, later Van Halen, lead vocals. This is their debut, 1973. It's just a stellar hard rock album, and when you think 70s hard rock, this is the album. One of the first albums that pops into my head. I Don't Want It, probably my favorite track on this. But you got Rock Candy, Rock the Nation, Bad Motor Scooter, classic stuff right there. Montrose, and let's see, and coming in next, number 21, I guess. If you're going to talk about Iggy and the Stooges, you got to talk about these guys. I also talked about them on my top 20 debut album show. Here's the CD copy of that. Kick Out the Jams. MC5. Here's our second album, Back in the USA. Third album, High Time. And then various collections that I've collected over the years. Looking at You, it's a B-sides thing. Babes in Arms is a pretty well-known kind of best of thing. Power Trip. There's a lot of live recordings on these, some demos of some of the stuff. But MC5 they're often also, just like the Stooges and others, regarded as the founders or kind of the proto-punk, right? But these guys, were pretty heavy. They had a blues edge, they had a soul edge, they had a really heavy bottom end, especially on that debut album, Kick Out the Jams. This right here was a little bit more poppy, but still really rocking. And another band that you wonder why they weren't bigger than they were. I think the controversy hurt them. They got associated with Revolution Rock and the White Panther Party, and I think that really kind of hurt them. You see the back cover here, classic. And this is one of those albums that there's always those albums in your life that you buy them in the store when you're a kid, and you're like, I saw the cover and I just thought this looks interesting, and I'd always read about the MC5, but I never heard them. And when I got it, I just fell in love immediately and have been obsessed with this album pretty much ever since. It just does not get old. Kick Out the Jams, an extremely heavy live album, and a weird choice to release a live album as your debut album. There you go. That's my 22nd choice. I believe that's where we're at. And if I get off in the number, we'll make it up when we can. This next one is a little bit gonna be a contrarian choice, but I consider these guys hard rock. It's Guns N' Roses, and I got the debut album here, original cover art that was banned after the first pressing. GNR Lies, this is their EP. I think when they were at their best was probably between about 1985, when their club days, and then they were playing bigger theaters and stuff up until the debut album, which was released in 87. I think from 85 to 87, 88. If you look at their performance, you can see it on YouTube. Here on YouTube, it's Live at the Ritz, 88, which was broadcast live on MTV. They were just really, really on that night. And also their live album, which you can now get live at the Marquee in London. They were just a really, really good band. You listen to the live stuff on this, and from the Live Like a Suicide EP that they merged with some acoustic songs for this. They're a band that just should have been so much more. By the time they got enormous, they were already disintegrating. And then when Steven Adler, the drummer, was fired due to drug use, that caused Izzy Stradlin to leave the band because he said he couldn't really play with another drummer. And there was drug problems, there was ego problems. Axl Rose walking off stage, causing riots. It was just everything under the sun. The Use Your Illusion albums are patchy. I mean, they've got some classic songs like November Rain, Don't Cry, Estranged are amazing songs, beautiful. You Ain't the First with Shannon Hoon, who Axl Rose kind of discovered, lead singer of Blind Melon. But I think you could have condensed those into one single album, and they would have been a lot better. All right, my next choice is Taste. This is Rory Gallagher, his original band. This is from, I believe, 1968, 69. Blues rock, Irish blues rock, really heavy. I mean, this is like Ireland's answer to Cream and Zeppelin put together. You're sort of talking about right before metal. It's just this really, really dirty, heavy blues. This is definitely a listen through. You want to listen to this all the way through. It's kind of like meant to be heard that way. But I finally picked this up about a year or two ago. Been wanting to get this one for a while. Taste, really good hard rock. This next band did their best stuff in the 80s. And although they at times leaned towards goth rock, they leaned towards metal, they leaned towards blues rock. It's the Cult. They're definitely a hard rock band, right? Sonic Temple. I've had this vinyl. This is the same copy I had when I was 13 years old. And it's technically the second album, Love. It's the one with She Sells Sanctuary and Rain on it, and Nirvana, and Big Neon Glitter. It's a great album. And then their third album, Electric, which is a great look for the band here, with the animal hide hat on Ian Anderson there. But the Cult, always love these guys. I think they're vastly underrated. They were kind of the bridge between, the whole Susie and the Banshees, not Mission of Burma, Sisters of Mercy, Cure, this sort of goth rock stuff. It's kind of what they came out of, and they moved into more blues rock with Electric. And by the time this was out, they were definitely leaning in the metal direction and hanging out with Guns N' Roses. And their drummer, Matt Sorum, ended up joining Guns N' Roses. So, love those guys. Love the Cult. This next band, this is definitely a contrarian choice, not because of the band, but because of the album that I chose. I love the first UFO album. I've heard criticisms. It sounds like demos. It sounds like they're just jamming around in a basement, and it does. It's not well put together, but it's very listenable, and it's the kind of thing you want to put on and just let it play, kind of like the Taste album. Um, this is their first album. They also had UFO 2, which was a very similar vein, and then after that, they could totally went into a whole production thing. Um, but definitely a British band who were around for a long, long time throughout the 70s and 80s, releasing all kinds of albums. Um, there's some interesting. They do a version of "Come On Everybody," which everyone's done, right? Eddie Cochran song. The song "Timothy" is probably my favorite on here. I don't know. This is just kind of a psychedelic meets bassy blues rock rave up. I don't know how else to describe it, but definitely one you should get if you're into hard rock and early proto-metal. Um, these guys at one time were referred to as heavy metal, but not anymore. They're thought of as a hard rock band. Aerosmith, and this is by far their best album, Rocks. For a long time, I was just not into Aerosmith. I always thought of the hits, and the hits. This is a classic example of a band where you've got to listen to the album cuts. To me, the hits are not the best representation of this band. Sometimes that's the case with bands, right? But not with Aerosmith. And on this album, you've got some songs that were way ahead of their time, like Combination, Rats in the Cellar, Sick as a Dog. I mean, you have elements of what would become hair metal 10 years later. They were already doing this in '76. They were really hitting their stride here with Draw the Line, Toys in the Attic, and those three albums. Just a really, really solid album, almost perfect. Every song on here is really good, and I have grown to respect them along with bands like Kiss. I just didn't grow. I wasn't into them growing up, and once I delved into the albums and got away from the radio hits, I realized just what a good band they were and are. Now here's one I think this is my only one from the '90s. Caius, and you got Mr. Ohm here. This is from '92. This is Blues for the Red Sun with a terrible album cover. Just a really difficult album cover to look at, but this is stoner rock, somewhere between grunge, which was going on at the time, and kind of some more psychedelic elements. I say these guys fall somewhere between metal, Soundgarden, and Smashing Pumpkins. But this is definitely, if you're into the kind of the bassy, stoner, sludgy kind of guitar work, this is a great band. Of course, Jeff Ohm would later go on to Queens of the Stone Age, the Eagles of Death Metal, and a bunch of other bands. He was connected with Dave Grohl for a minute. But this is just, if you're going to start with anything, I'd start with this album right here, Caius. Next one is often referred to as glam in the glam rock subgenre. Slade. I love this album right here. Slade. Very strange. But this one's got Goodbye to Jane, Mama We're All Crazy Now, which is my favorite song by them. Move Over, which is a Janis Joplin cover. Definitely glam rock, but very heavy, very hard. One of the heavier of the glam rock bands. Certainly heavier than T-Rex, Bowie, and all the rest. But I love those guys. Good. Very popular in England too. They were huge in England. Had lots of #1 hits. Not so much over here, right? And then later in the early '80s, Quiet Riot would cover their song "Mama We're All Crazy Now," as well as "Come On Feel the Noise," which would become a top 5 hit for them. It's kind of like the beginning of metal as we know it in the '80s. Next one up, James Gang. Love that classic cover, very American looking with the motorbikes there. Joe Walsh, also, he's, because of his work with the Eagles and his solo stuff, was a lot softer and poppy. A lot of people think of James Gang is that way. They just assume, well, if Joe Walsh is in the band, then they must be. This is really heavy stuff, though. They were a heavy rock band in the early days. This is their third album. This is the one with Walk Away, Midnight Man. But you got Joe Walsh on guitar, you got Jim Fox, Dale Peters, and then Rides Again has Funk 49, which is my favorite, and The Bomber, classic stuff right there. James King, definitely hard rock. There's no way you can call them, country rock or anything associated with what the Eagles did, because that was he started out very heavy. This one I featured on my show a few weeks ago. Debut albums, Fast Way. This is just a great sample of hard rock at its best, the way it's meant to sound. Of course, when you've got veteran musicians like Jerry Shirley, you get the picture of the band there. Jerry Shirley on drums, who going all the way back to the late '60s actually played on Syd Barrett's solo album, Madcap Laughs, and he's played with a lot of other people. Of course, Humble Pie was the biggest example, drumming for them. And then you got Fast Eddie Clarke on guitar from Motorhead right here. But this 1983, it definitely looks like it's from 1983. Just a classic sample of hard rock right there. Gotta have that one. Let's see. Okay, next up, debut album. It's gonna be my favorite, but Van Halen. I mean, come on. They were once another band that was once considered metal, but the purists do not consider it anymore. Even though Eddie Van Halen was the guy, who kind of invented shredding. Even though Ritchie Blackmore was finger tapping a lot earlier on songs like Child in Time on Deep Purple's In Rock album. If you can go on YouTube here and look for that performance, it's an amazing live performance. But it was Eddie that really perfected that technique, and then the style, the tone, the guitar tone, for sure. The way that his brother Alex drums. You got the back cover there, David Lee Roth. But yeah, Van Halen 1, definitely my favorite album by them. Speaking of debut albums, Queen's first album, 1973. A lot of people don't realize just how heavy Queen were in the early days. This is an amazing album, amazing debut album. Out of the gate, just every song is just out there. They've got some of the orchestral stuff already going on, but they're really heavy. And if you don't believe that, go check out their. You can download, or you can hear the stream of the live performance of the Rainbow '74, I believe it is, and it's also, you can see the footage that was filmed right here on YouTube. Amazing. They were a heavy band before they started kind of doing the hits, and around about 75, 76 they started doing Bohemian Rhapsody and My Best Friend came out. But great debut, one of the greatest debuts of all time right there. Queen. All right, and now we're starting to get to stuff that might probably like the last 10 are definitely my favorites. These guys, I even hate putting them so low because these guys are one of my all-time favorite bands. And that is Humble Pie. It's their classic album, Smokin'. The CD version there. And let's see, I got a second copy on vinyl. And I used to have this album on cassette a long time ago. Got their amazing, probably my all-time favorite live album, Rockin' the Fillmore, '71, with Peter Frampton still in the band. You got Lost and Found, which is really town and country and Safe as Yesterday albums put together. This is early Humble Pie with Peter Frampton as well. But this is Jerry Shirley's in the band. Of course, Steve Marriott, lead vocals. Amazing vocalist, right? You got Eat It. And there's the fold out. Great live shot of the band. Terrible album cover, though, on that one. And let's see. And then I got a Humble Pie collection. Hot and Nasty. Yeah, just when you're talking about blues rock and heavy English rock, the British bands, in my opinion, just they're on another level when it comes to this kind of stuff. Um, Unfortunately, we would lose Steve Marriott in '91. He actually used to live in my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, and he died in a house fire, '91. But huge influence on um, some of the hard rock bands I've already mentioned, like Guns N' Roses, Black Crowes, obviously influence on Black Crowes. But these guys just, you would talk about near perfect albums. Something like this is like one of those. Every song is a classic, perfectly executed. All the while they're partying, they're on drugs, and they still were able to pull this together. Some really good stuff from those guys. All right, next up is a band. Oftentimes, I would consider my all-time favorite band, Deep Purple. And there's their debut album, which is Shades of Deep Purple, which was before Ian Gillan joined as their singer. This is the one with the song, Joe South song, Hush on it. It was their first big hit. They were a totally different band then. And then, of course, Machine Head. I think when you're talking about early metal and proto-metal, these guys, I mean, obviously Sabbath and Zeppelin are up there, but if there's a close third, it's Deep Purple, and I kind of interchange. I listen to Deep Purple now more than Zeppelin or Black Sabbath, especially their album In Rock, 1970, that wonderful year. But yeah, I just think that when you look at the screaming vocals of Ian Gillan, that was sort of the foundation of metal music, right? The finger tapping, Richie Blackmore, the amazing guitar work. Ian Pace, one of the greatest drummers of all time. And then I love the Roger Glover's bass playing has got this really, really low bottom end that works perfectly with John Lord's electrified distorted organ. And all those elements had to be there for that, what is that, Mark 1 phase? I don't know. I can't keep track of all the marks, but that lineup, just absolutely the best. Let's see. So now I'm getting to the last 9 or so here. And the next band up is these guys, Def Leppard, and I know a lot of people will say they're a metal band, especially on this album and the first album, On Through the Night. But I think of these guys as a hard rock band. As time has gone by, when we think of metal, we think of very specific things, and metal's gone into so many subgenres. But when you really get down to it, these 2 albums right here, this is just good hard rock. Loud guitars, the drums and bass, just real. Especially this album, this is just pure guitar work all the way through. And then by the time they get to this, I have often argued that this album is actually a little bit, in the harder elements, is a harder rocking album. It does have a lot of pop stuff too, like Photograph and Too Late for Love, but and they're bringing in synthesizers a little bit. But 1983. This is one of my all-time favorite albums right here. I think I featured this on my list when I did that first video. But when Phil Collen came into the band, I think he really added something. And a lot of metal purists give them a lot of crap for selling out or becoming a pop band, and they're not metal anymore. But the guitar work on here between Steve Clark and Phil Collen, pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Next up are some, along with those, they're considered one of the big 4, the British pioneers of early metal music, along with Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and Deep Purple. It's Uriah Heep. There you go. And you got Demons and Wizards over here, and then a later album when John Wetton joined the band, High and Mighty. Oddly enough, David Byron is still in the band. You still had Mick Box on guitar, Ken Hensley on guitar, Lee Kerslake on drums, and John Wetton was the bass player and vocalist. And I think John Wetton did a really good job on this. I'm a huge John Wetton fan. he had recently been in King Crimson right before this. Did Red, which is their greatest album in my opinion. And then I love that album cover right there. And this album as well, 1972, Roger Dean album art. Can't go wrong. I mean, you got The Wizard, you got Easy Living. It's the big classics, right? Traveler in Time, Rainbow Demon. Very strange band, also working with the distorted organ, just like Deep Purple, especially in these early days. And by this time, though, this is about 76, they had just become just a really good hard rock band. Kind of moved away from the prog. Well, a little bit proggy with John Wetton in the band, but not like they were. And a little less early metal, if you will. Love those guys. All right, so next up, you're going to talk about hard rock. You got to talk about these guys, right? Thin Lizzy, another band that I grew up liking okay, but it never really got into them, and then until I started digging into album cuts, like Cowboy Song is on this. Of course, Jailbreak and Boys Are Back in Town are the big hits on this album. This is like their big breakthrough album, but they have a lot of albums you need to check out. In the sort of their first couple albums were kind of patchy, and then they move into the mid-70s. The guitar work is just incredible. Some of the stuff they do. Let's see if on this album you've got, this is Brian Robertson on this one, Scott Graham. But yeah, this is Thin Lizzy, Jailbreak. They'd had a couple of guitar lineup changes with guitar players. And Black Rose is another album that's just amazing that you really need to check out. And a good starting point would be just to listen to Cowboy Song by them and some of the mid-70s stuff. I'd say from 73 to 77 in all the albums in there. Next up is a band that I just absolutely adore and can't get enough of these guys. This is their debut album right here, Cactus. This is Tim Bogert and Carmen Appice on bass and drums. One of the best rhythm sections ever. One of the heaviest American bands ever right here. Carmen Appice and Tim Bogert had been in Vanilla Fudge, which were hugely influential on Deep Purple, actually, with the heavy organ and the kind of thundering drumming of Carmen. You got a great shot of the band back there. There's Tim Bogert right there. Carmine. But yeah, I mean, it's just incredibly heavy. They've often been called America's answer to Led Zeppelin. But when you think about all the big, heavy bands were coming out of England at this time, this was this is 1970, another great album from a great year. This is the closest thing America produced, along with Montrose and some others, Van Halen later, to really heavy proto-metal kind of stuff. Their second album was also great too, but this is one of the best debut albums of all time. The only prop I have for these guys is this live album here, Caught in the Act, Grand Funk Railroad. I mean, when you talk about, problem with Grand Funk Railroad is everyone thinks of those hits, those covers. They did a lot of soul covers, Some Kind of Wonderful, some novelty songs like Bad Time, which is not a bad song, but Some Kind of Wonderful and Locomotion, and We're an American Band, just novelty stuff, and this is what they're known for. But you got to listen to this live album, and you got to listen to their debut album, first couple of albums actually. Really, really heavy stuff. Power Trio, once again, it works. The formula works. We've seen it. Whether it's the Police, Nirvana, Cream, Budgie, but yeah. Let's see. We'll take this out here. Yeah, not much of a fold out, but you've got like a kind of a zoom in shot there of the band. But yeah, Grand Funk Railroad. Cannot go wrong. And I would definitely start with Caught in the Act, the live album. The I'm Your Captain album is great. I love the title track. That is one hit that I do like by them. And then the debut album, which I don't have a prop with me, but it's the red one where it just says Grand Funk on it. Really, really bass heavy, really loud guitars and drumming. But yeah, you can't talk about hard rock and that kind of late 60s, early 70s kind of influence onto heavy metal music without talking about Grand Funk or Grand Funk Railroad, as they would be called. Next up, gotta go with these guys, Boston. And I have their second album somewhere, but I couldn't find it. As a prop. You know, I talked about this on our debut album show a few weeks ago. Just a shot of the band there. Brad Delp, one of the greatest singers of all time, underrated. Tom Scholz, genius guitar player, inventor of the Music Man box, pedal. A lot of recording technique stuff he pioneered. Guy was a wizard recording this album, primarily in his basement, as we all know. And a friend of mine pointed this out to me. I had for years did not realize that, you see the city up here, but on the cover art, these are actually guitars. These things. Huh. Anyway. And this album doesn't get a lot of love, but I love Third Stage. Don't Look Back, the second album, to me just seems like a poor, watered-down version of this. I love We're Ready. I love the hits. Can't You Say? Cool the Engines. I like all the hits on this. Amanda's great. To Be a Man. My Destination. It's good stuff. Good stuff. And now we're moving into the kind of the meat. These are the last. This is like the top three. And you can't talk about hard rock and Proto-Metal without talking about these guys. Another one of my favorite live albums of all time. If You Want Blood, You Got It. AC/DC. There's High Voltage. I just think this is a band that has been criticized for kind of putting out the same music for going on 50 years now. But when they were in their prime, which was this time, Bon Scott was the lead vocalist. 75 to 79. And on into the Brian Johnson years in the early 80s, too. I love Fly on the Wall album, Flick of the Switch. I don't need to really hear Back in Black album anymore. They kind of missed with For Those About to Rock, but then they picked it right back up with Flick of the Switch. Fly on the Wall is an immensely underrated AC/DC album, really heavy. Brian Johnson's never sounded better, in my opinion. But, come on. Back in Black's a great album. And then you go back to the Bon Scott days, and it's like, this stuff, this is iconic, right? And you got the swagger and the charm of Bon Scott juxtaposed against Angus and the kind of mascot look. It's brilliant. Brilliant stuff. I think this has Ride On it. That slower song. No, that's on Dirty Deeds, which I also have upstairs. I didn't bring that one down. But, they were, again, once called metal, now called hard rock. They influenced both, countless hard rock and metal bands who cite AC/DC as an influence. Alright, so this is a tough choice. I'm going to have to put these guys at number 2. The Mighty Black Sabbath. These guys are still considered metal, even today. They're like the first metal band. They're also very hard rock. And also got this on disc. And the second album, Paranoid. Third album. I got Bloody Sabbath. Fifth album. And I've got a volume 4 as well, and some others, but those are the only props I brought out. But, come on. These guys started it all. and they contributed a lot to hard rock as well. Um, just incredible um, that they pretty much single-handedly invented a genre that we now know as metal music with this album right here in 1970. Started it all. But when you're strictly talking about hard rock and a band that's probably not been considered heavy metal for a long, long, long time, even though, like I said, Black Sabbath are still considered. I mean, come on, who else could it be? Led Zeppelin. And I pulled this as a prop because this is still my go-to. This is my favorite album by them. I have for years I swore that House of the Holy was their perfect album. But I don't need to hear Dancing Days ever again. Not a fan of Jermaker. And I've also grown to love Physical Graffiti, which I never understood why people were so crazy about Physical Graffiti, but I think that's actually their perfect album. When you look at production, songwriting, and just how the songs are put together. But what album I want to listen to, the one I want to grab and put on in the car or in the house at top volume, is this one right here. I mean, come on, classic. This is also brilliant, just like the Boston thing. I mean, this was recorded while they were on tour for the first album. Pretty insane. I got some honorable mentions here. And I didn't include these guys in my list, official list, because I just forgot some of my props upstairs. I have a bunch of vinyl by these guys, but, Rush, I consider Rush a hard rock band. They had a lot of hard rock elements in the 70s, especially. Prog, of course, Canadian prog, and one of the biggest bands of all time. Stellar musicians all the way around. We don't need to tell the story of Rush, but I just think you think of songs like Bastille Day, right? And Finding My Way from Crest of Steel. Some of the stuff on Fly By Night, even as late as Hemispheres. I mean, they're doing hard rock, and especially in this album. I mean, come on, 2112. Every hard rock and metal band in the 80s cites this as an influence. You just hear it time and time again. I'm also going to honorably mention Alice Cooper. I've also got the Killers album upstairs, but classic stuff, right? I mean, he was somewhere between glam and metal, early metal, and but definitely hard rock in hindsight, right? I love Elected. I love Be My Lover, Under My Wheels. That's my all-time favorite Alice Cooper. This is the stuff right here, No More Mr. Nice Guy, Hello Hooray, School's Out, I'm 18, Isn't My Body. This is like the greatest hits thing I got. Another honorable mention is these guys right here. Rare Bird. It's a rare band, too. A lot of people don't know this band. They have a song, Bird on a Wing. It's just amazing. Some cool cover art there. One interesting bit of trivia. I'll fold it out here. You get like the Graham Field, who you see right here, actually appeared in the Spinal Tap movie. He was the keyboard player for the band. But not a lot is known about this band. I mean, they were British. They're kind of proggy, kind of it's that typical early 70s organ-laden sound. But great album, Rare Bird. It's a debut right there. Check that out. Another honorable mention, Mountain. This is their debut album, Mountain Climbing. Another American band along with Cactus and Montrose, who were the closest thing to a heavy metal band in the early 70s. Late 60s, early 70s. The mighty Leslie West, who had been in The Vagrants. There's a picture of him on the back with Felix. Felix Pappalardi. But yeah, The Vagrants were kind of like a psychedelic garage nuggets band. And I think they technically had an album before this. It was called Leslie West's Mountain, but this is considered the true mountain right here. Mississippi Queen, theme from an imaginary western. Never in My Life, Free Asker's Farm, classic stuff. And one more here. I'm gonna got to give props to this. It's 1968, so this is before Deep Purple, Zeppelin, Black Sabbath. These guys, huge pioneer of metal music and hard rock, even though at the time it was probably called acid rock or psychedelic music, which it was. But they definitely had a harder edge, and I would highly recommend you check out. This is a San Diego band, by the way. Check out their live albums that you can find on iTunes and Spotify. Their 1968 at the Fillmore West is just one of the best. You can tell they were meant to be a live band for sure. And most of the stuff sounds like it was recorded live, which a lot of times that was kind of the new thing at the time. But the live stuff is far superior. But this is a great debut album. I mean, come on. It's In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. You know, we all know this album. All right, so there you have it. Those are my top 25 plus honorable mentions of hard rock and proto-metal bands of all time. Again, those are just my favorites. I'd love to hear your list, so if you want to leave it in the comments below, and please give me a like and spread the word. I'm going to be coming back with another ranking show. I'm probably going to be ranking the albums of David Bowie, The Smiths, U2, REM. I'd like to do all those bands, Velvet Underground, some of my favorite bands coming up. But I will get to it. And until next time, see you on Smoke Signals. I'm your host, Ethan. See ya.